I was shocked to see that at the UN Security Council meeting, the United States came out strongly in favor of a ceasefire and enforcing some resolutions that the UN had previously blocked. The U.S. had previously blocked. I think it was 2735 and 2720 were the resolutions. One was calling for the immediate ceasefire. That was 2735. And 2720 was a requirement that the demographic and geographic borders of pre-October 7th Gaza must return. Basically saying that just because you destroyed Gaza does not mean that you now can change the boundaries of what was Gaza, nor does it mean that you can send settlers in and start to claim that land through kind of attrition or, migration. This, I believe, actually is the strongest action and is a reflection of a lot of pressure on the Democrats, on Joe Biden, although I don't think Joe Biden actually feels the pressure from his party on this. I think he probably got something. I think he and Kamala are in discussions like, this is going to hurt my campaign, Joe. We got to do something. But I think more so, this is a reflection of Joe Biden as a person and as a leader being fed up with Netanyahu. All right, everyone, we are back for another episode, and we are just ticking down the days to Election Day. Actually, in many states, the election is already, voting has already started. The election is in full swing. As you can tell, I will be without Chris today. It was a little bit sudden, so one of the things I would like to do is bring on a guest if it happens again. So if you are interested in joining one of our recordings, please leave a message in or a comment on YouTube or Spotify, wherever you see us. I'd be really interested in bringing someone on to go back and forth with, either with Chris and I, or if either Chris or I are out, you could join us. Well, there's a lot of news, and I guess we should jump right in. Chris should be back next week, I presume. Listen, where do you start? We are. It seems like we're in the middle of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, with war in the Middle East, storms ravaging our country, and the poor people in the Southeast. And I know that there can be this feeling of utter despair. There is a bit of levity in some of the news that's happening as well. If you haven't been following it, I don't know what state you're watching this from, but everywhere from Michigan to Arizona, and coming up next week here in Texas, there have been Senate debates. So Slotkin and Rogers in Michigan this week, Gallego and Lake in Arizona. I highly recommend that you take a look at those, at least, a quick search on Twitter just to see the highlights and the lowlights. I think it is indicative of where the election may go in the Senate for many of these races, that abortion was a major topic. Ironically, or maybe not ironically, but maybe somewhat surprisingly, obviously Slotkin was had the upper hand in the abortion topic during her debate with Mike Rogers. But it was Gallego as a man who had maybe the majority position for most women. And he really hit Carrie Lake pretty hard over her, let's say, playing footsie with the 1864 law in Arizona that Supreme Court said should still be in effect, and was very onerous towards a woman's right to to choose whether or not to have a baby. I think there are clips, you can see them on Twitter, even from the Gallego campaign, that where she said at a political gathering that they would have to rely on sheriffs to enforce that law because the governor and the attorney general of Arizona had no interest in enforcing a 70, whatever it is, 150-year-old law. So that's kind of where we jump in. What are going to be the big issues that pop up? I think something happened in the last day. So if you happen to see the last episode, one of the things that Chris and I both agreed on, I think it was the last episode, it might have been the one before, I certainly believed that Israel, Gaza, the battle happening there, and then now Iran kind of becoming more embroiled, and the longshoremen strike would be a much bigger determiner of the outcome of the election than the VP debate. So as we were talking about the VP debate, I think it's a lot of much ado about nothing. I don't think anybody really gives a shit who won a VP debate unless it's something drastic. One might say that saying that you've become friends with school shooters is drastic, but if he had meant it, that would have been a drastic change. I think everyone knows what he meant. He was in a flurry in his speech. He was very nervous. It was obvious that Walz was very nervous. I think what he meant, we all know what he meant. I'm not even going to speak for him. I think everyone knows what he meant. So it didn't really affect that much. But it does look like the ILA, the Longshoremen's Union, did reach a tentative agreement on October 4th, a 62% raise over 6 years for its members. Hey, good for them, by the way. As someone who I have started a business, and maybe you're the management level, you always want to reduce your costs as much as possible. I actually don't think that labor is the best place to reduce costs. I think you reduce other costs, you look at ways to be more efficient, but paying your people well and them being able to buy your products and have a not just a livable wage, but a thriving wage, and be able to live thriving lives with their families, I think that actually is better for business anyway. But if I have to pick a side, I pick the side of labor. I pick the side of the workers. So I say good for them. This is also great for Harris, by the way. This removes a potential drag on the economy, just as all of the statistics that are coming out now show cooling of inflation, increasing of employment. Pay may still be lagging inflation. Obviously, pay has been something that for the last 40 years has stagnated, maybe longer. But the point being, things are moving in her favor in that way. So that's ticking one off the box right there. We got that one out of the way for her. The other is Israel and Hamas. And that's where I want to jump in today. I was shocked to see that at the UN Security Council meeting, the United States came out strongly in favor of a ceasefire and enforcing some resolutions that the UN had previously the U.S. had previously blocked. I think it was 2735 and 2720 were the resolutions. One was calling for the immediate ceasefire. That was 2735. And 2720 was a requirement that the demographic and geographic borders of pre-October 7th Gaza must return. Basically saying that just because you destroyed Gaza does not mean that you now can change the boundaries of what was Gaza, nor does it mean that you can send settlers in and start to claim that land through kind of attrition or migration. This, I believe, actually is the strongest action and is a reflection of a lot of pressure on the Democrats, on Joe Biden, although I don't think Joe Biden actually feels the pressure from his party on this. I think he probably got something. I think he and Kamala are in discussions like, this is going to hurt my campaign, Joe. We got to do something. But I think more so, this is a reflection of Joe Biden as a person and as a leader being fed up with Netanyahu and his, I would say, prevarication, um, and playing footsie with Donald Trump, believing that he'll get something better later on if Trump's in office. Probably, maybe annexing Gaza or a good part of Gaza. Point being, we talked about this before, and we talked about it was in the whole ILA Israel conversation. They were playing for themselves. I think, I was pleasantly surprised in a way, meaning that I think the president of the Longshoremen's Union we made a very rational and good deal on the 62%. He said he wanted 75, but you don't get everything you want in negotiations. But he got more than the 50% when they said they were going to go on strike. So I think that I can understand why he did that. And it does look like it wasn't a political maneuver necessarily. It was a pressure maneuver to get the best for his members, I guess. The other side of that is maybe you could say the same thing about Bibi Netanyahu, that he's putting pressure on. But it does look like there's provocation and escalation, especially with the attacks, the beeper and cell phone attacks. So I think there was a lot of pressure. And I think what you're seeing is basically a strained relationship. And I think Joe Biden has done his best as a statesman to keep that at a diplomatic, private level and towing the line publicly, saying, we're friends, we support them as long as that, they aren't doing anything wrong. When they do something wrong, the expectation is that they will investigate and that they would be operating in a way that we would hope, that we would expect ourselves to operate, right? And that we aren't targeting civilians and stuff like that. People can disagree whether or not that is actually what Israel is doing, but in a public, they've made the administration has made it clear that's what they would expect for continued support. But I think privately in those conversations, and that's where you've seen leaks that Joe Biden is personally frustrated. But I think even privately from a government level, there's been a lot more pressure. And my assumption is that this is a symptom or a signal that the U.S. is going to start to up the pressure on Netanyahu and will not continue to be dragged further into this because of him, right? I don't think that means that there's a loss of support for Israel. I do think that means that there is a loss of support for Netanyahu, which, if the old man is smart, probably means it's time to exit stage right. Because I think that if it becomes clear to the Israeli people that he has lost the support, he personally has lost the support of the American government, I think that there's already plenty of people in Israel who would like to see Netanyahu go. I think the writing's on the wall for him personally. But this also, to the point, I think that's also two down for Kamala. I think if it stays on that trajectory, we have a ways to go. We're looking at about 27 days now or something like that to the election. So anything can happen. There are many October surprises, I'm sure, coming at us, as the entire election season has been a surprise. But I think she's been a fortunate recipient now of a major change in those two potential anchors on her. Now, what I don't think anyone thought necessarily would come her way as an October surprise is two massive hurricanes that have wreaked havoc on an area of the country that is pro-Trump and already prone to conspiratorial thinking and a distrust of government. Actually, a distrust of everyone except for Trump, to the point where I would even make the argument a distrust of anyone who doesn't support Trump, including their pastor, their doctor, their state legislator, their governor, anyone who doesn't support Trump. There is a group of people who only trust Donald Trump. Only, maybe more so than they trust themselves. It's an interesting thing. I'm going to throw that out there. Let me know if you disagree, but I certainly think that there is a group of people who have abdicated control and trust in themselves and in life and in other people, and given that over to Donald Trump. And ironically, it is, or maybe not ironically, maybe suitingly, it is those people who have been most affected by the two storms, Helene and Milton. I recently saw, it looks like there are two or three other storms out in the Atlantic and maybe one coming up the Gulf, if I saw right, if I'm remembering correctly, that are yet to hit as well. How that affects the race, I think the only effect would be, whereas maybe Kamala was surging in North Carolina, or surging might not be the word, but gaining traction in North Carolina and keeping Georgia tight. Will she be able to do that, especially in North Carolina, post Helene and fallout from Milton, and perhaps any other or any future storms that may be coming in the next 30 days? So there may have been a benefit where I would have to look where some of those states had early voting already. So maybe this benefits Kamala. We've talked here before. Democrats are known for voting early, voting by mail. Although interestingly, I don't know that mail. If you mailed it the day before the storm, and then the storm came, like, did your mail get destroyed at the post office? I don't know, right? But let's say a good amount of Democrats may have voted early, especially like, let's say, North Carolina, prior to the storm. If early, I'm actually going to look that up. When was early voting? When does early? So yeah, it looks like it depends on where you live. Is the short answer to that question, which seems overly complicated. I don't know why. What are the key deadlines? Yeah, that doesn't make much sense, actually. Without taking up too much time, the point being, it could actually help Kamala in North Carolina. Georgia, the same thing. I think there may be a bit of a slightly less impact in Georgia. Not that Georgia wasn't hit hard. I know that it was. But I don't think it was hit. I don't think anywhere was hit as hard as was it like Western North Carolina, Eastern Tennessee. Tennessee, she was never going to win. Florida's an interesting one. How will it affect the Senate race? How will it affect Kamala, who also seemed to be gaining traction in Florida? Also, I don't know when early voting starts in Florida. Perhaps I should have looked that up, but I didn't really think all the way through as I was preparing for this. Just the effect that perhaps it is a benefit to Democrats that with the storms hitting, that perhaps there were early votes that were already cast. And then now, how are they going to run polling stations in the utter destruction that is Western North Carolina? And also Florida now with Milton passing through and wreaking havoc. I would assume in the next 27 days, I'm hopeful actually, because whether or not people vote the way I think they should vote has nothing to do with it. I think I want people to be able to exercise their right to vote and whatever they believe. So I'm hopeful that with enough aid and with enough support of all of the different agencies at different governmental levels, that actually the polls will be able to open. But in looking ahead to the presidential, it does seem to me that there is a lot of favor behind Kamala now, not necessarily of her own making, just fortunately, I mean, luck matters, and there are things that are breaking her way. And I think that's a bit why we see a little bit of the sclerotic response from Trump and his allies that Democrats are controlling the weather, or that people are only getting $750. I lived in Florida. I lived in California. These are places that deal with natural disasters, whether it's a hurricane or a storm, or a wildfire, or an earthquake. Does anyone really believe that you get 750 if you qualify right after something and then you never see any money again? Doesn't it? I mean, it takes time for the process to happen. So to believe that that's the only thing available to people, this shit just happened. So, I mean, what world are you living in? I think that's what people want to be true so they can bitch about something. But I think logically they know that's not true. Now, two opposite things can be true at the same time. Do I think that we've spent a shit ton of money on illegal immigration problem in this country and it's reduced or made it more difficult to respond to other issues within FEMA? Probably. I'd also say we spend too much goddamn money on defense and it makes it hard to do anything else as well. So, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Also, there are many reports, and there's actually, I think it's a 60 Minutes, or it might be the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. There's a whistleblower who I think was in Florida, was an adjuster who worked for insurance companies, and there is a now a well documented report that was on TV that insurance companies would pay 15 grand for an adjustment that an adjuster said this is a $65,000 claim. So two things can be true at the same time. People are getting screwed by insurance companies more than the government, in my opinion. But probably by the government as well. Life is not fair. I hope I'm not breaking that to anyone. Certainly not anyone over fucking 25 years old. Life is not fair. But is there a concerted effort by the government to screw the people from Helene? I don't believe that. I don't actually think anybody believes that. I think people want to believe that. And when you want to believe something, that's a very powerful force. So, two things are true, right? Do we need to fix the border situation? Do we need to figure out what the fuck we're doing with people in the country, giving money to them, kicking kids out of schools and inner city neighborhoods so that we can use the school to house illegal immigrants? How are those fucking kids supposed to learn? Yeah, there are real problems. We're never going to solve those problems if we're trying to solve it with conspiracy theories and point the finger saying that Democrats are controlling the fucking weather. That's never going to solve a real problem that way. If you want to solve real problems, you have to have real logical thought and rational opinions and actually put forth some real possible solutions. Now, you can say a possible solution is to close the border and put up a wall. Okay, that's not irrational. I get that. A border wall. I got it. Now, what about the people that are already here? We're going to deport all of them. Okay, well, that's a lot of money too. So, how are you going to deport them? I mean, explain the logic behind that. Are we going to send the military to every house to say, knock on doors and say, do you have illegal immigrants here? No. Now, could we make it a requirement to run E-Verify before hiring people? Sure. Will we have a lot of jobs that don't get done? Probably. I'm guessing a lot of fucking fruit won't get picked. I'm guessing a lot of houses won't get built. I'm guessing a lot of the work that Americans don't want to do, me included, I'm no better than anybody else. A lot of the hard work that people are doing that have come here to work hard, make some money, probably won't get done. So all I'm saying is, I got off on a tangent there, a little bit on my soapbox, but my point being, if we can just accept that two things can be true, and like let's look at the actual problem and solve the problems. There's a middle ground. We actually agree more than we disagree, and I think you can find solutions that, just like with the longshoremen, it may not be everything you wanted, but it's goddamn close to what everything you want. It might not be 75% pay raise, 62% is pretty good. Take the win, go home. Take the win, go celebrate with your team. The other side, they didn't have to pay the 75, so they can take the win and go and celebrate with their team as well, right? Nobody gets everything they want. Everybody gets a little bit of what they want. And that's what the fucking border bill was that Trump said to kill, just so you know. Not yeah, of course. Are there Republicans that would say, "Oh, it wasn't a good bill because X, Y, Z"? Okay, yeah, it didn't have everything you wanted. Probably had some shit you didn't want. I got it. But was it a step in the direction you want to go? Sure. Same thing with the other side. They didn't want some of the things that were in it, but are there some things they wanted? Yeah. Is it a negotiation? Is it a compromise that's palatable and gets us to solving some problems? Yeah, it gets us closer. I hate to break it to everybody, but the world is never going to stop being full of challenges. You don't do one action and solve forever. It's just like Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, whatever you want to call it, right? Does it make does that mean everybody lives to 100 and that nobody has to pay for health insurance and that gumdrops and rainbows are everywhere? No. Is it a step towards something? Maybe, hopefully. Hopefully it's a step towards people being insured and being able to live, but there are other problems along with it. So, my point being that way down the rabbit hole and on the tangent there, but my point being, I think that things have broken in Kamala's favor. I think she has been able to apply some pressure. Things are working for her, and you know, even the storms and the conspiracy theories, I think it splits the electorate even more in some ways. I think it pushes the extremes further to the end, and I think in the middle, I think it does benefit her because I don't think, my guess is suburban people of Pittsburgh probably aren't believing that Helene was caused by Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Soros. I don't know. I'm guessing that if they're in the middle and there's any propensity at all to vote for Kamala, then they're not going to buy that. Right now, if there's no propensity to vote for her, if they already hate her, yeah, I'm sure they're happy to believe that. But if they're undecided, if there's any potential propensity, then no, I don't think that. And sadly, you can see the reports for yourselves, but there are people who need aid in Western North Carolina or North Carolina in general. I don't know, it could be beyond Western North Carolina, but I think that was the predominant area, who need the aid from the government that are not accepting it because they're listening to Donald Trump. They're afraid they're going to have their property taken by FEMA if they take aid. I mean, things that aren't true, but again, like I just said at the beginning of this, they have given up on believing in themselves and believing in their own thoughts and believing in their own and believing anyone in government, whether it's their state legislator or their city councilman or their the pastor at their church, or if Donald Trump says it, he is the overarching authority. That's not a place I would want to be in. I don't rely on anybody to tell me what's reality. I can figure it out on my own. I believe I can figure it out. Certainly, as more people tell me something from disparate sources, I don't attack them for telling me something that is an uneasy potential truth. I think, maybe they know something I don't. Let me ask more. Anyway, although I am human, I have biases, and that's also true. Now, what could hurt Kamala? We talked a bit on this podcast about who's seen as the incumbent, and that will potentially determine, and it has a high likelihood of determining who the next who will be elected president. And Kamala was on the Tonight Show or the Late Show or whatever it is with Stephen Colbert, and he actually said to her, he said, the polling shows that this is a change election, that that people say they will vote for whichever candidate is seen as the candidate of change. People want a change. And I've said on this show before, that's fucking insane, because things can change in many different ways. They can change for the better, they can change for the worse. So just saying I want to change is a bit juvenile, to be honest with you. So if you're that person, no offense, but it is juvenile. Saying I want to vote for someone who has a vision to improve the future, that's a fucking rational statement. But saying, I just want change, I just want change, I just want change, it's very juvenile. And I was too young or too naive or maybe too biased to realize that when Obama ran for president. But hope and change, while tying the two together, maybe infers that you want a hopeful change, it doesn't go far enough. It's a great slogan, I think. It's actually a great political slogan, but it isn't accurate because change is not always for the better. And maybe that's okay to believe that we should always be improving, or life should be getting better and better and better is probably unsustainable. So, my point being, to go back, Kamala's on the Tonight Show or the Late Show or whichever show it is with Stephen Colbert, and he points out, people are looking for the change candidate. Now, I've said, and I stand by it, I give a shit if somebody thinks it makes me sound like misogynistic or sexist, because it has nothing to do with any of that. I actually do think that in a normal election cycle or in previous election cycles, there's not a chance in hell Kamala would ever get elected president. If she ran against, truthfully, even if she ran against Hillary, I think Hillary is a better candidate. If she ran against Obama, better candidate. If she had been the nominee and run against Mitt Romney, better candidate is Mitt Romney. I think the reason behind that is all politicians are politicians. I think we would have to be naive and foolish to think that a politician isn't a politician. Anybody running for a political position, by the way, is a politician. Donald Trump is a politician. There's a very thin line between being and politicians don't even necessarily have to work in politics. I would argue that many of the general staff of the military are politicians. Many of the leaders of massive corporations are politicians. What's his face at is it Bank of JP Morgan? Can't think of his name right now. These are politicians. You must be political to make it to that level, and you must be even more political and more savvy to stay at that level. Still bothering me, I can't think of his name, but you know what I'm talking about. So a politician is a politician, and a politician's job, as Chris has said multiple times, is to keep their job or to win the next level job, to gain power or maintain power. And really, if you're just maintaining power, you're losing power. So the politician's job is to always gain power. You cannot affect change without the power to affect change, right? So I don't hold it against a politician for giving a political answer. However, there are good politicians and there are shit politicians. And I think the determiner of that is the ability to convince people who will give you power that your political answer is actually based in a value you personally hold, right? So as an example, Donald Trump, I think he gives many political answers. Shit, I don't even think it. I know it. Just look at his shit back and forth on abortion. And anyone generally that I've experienced that is one of those people that has given up any potential calling Trump on bullshit and have given up kind of their autonomy to him, they will never acknowledge this. But anyone who is even-minded, right, which means you might like Trump, but you accept he has foibles, he's a politician, he's everything else, but you like him, you like his policies, or there's something about that. Okay, that's cool. You can do that. There's no judgment from me. But if you're that person and we have a conversation and we start talking about abortion, then you can point out and we'll agree that position changes quite often. And it's changed multiple times just since he's been running in this cycle. I'm not even going back to 2016. Certainly since 2020. And as it's gotten closer to this election, as IVF has become an issue, as it's become a political fucking albatross around his throat, he has nuanced that position as much as possible. Why? Because that is a political answer. But what makes him a great politician is that many, many, many people believe he has a sincere, values-driven purpose and reasoning behind his positions on abortion. It's not just abortion, by the way. But that's an example. So back to Stephen Colbert, why I think Kamala Harris is so weak and why I think it's a very interesting case study of how the person and the moment often must intersect. Just like Trump and the moment of 2016 intersected, just like really Biden and the moment of 2020 intersected. It is interesting to me to see where Kamala Harris and the moment are intersecting. And let me explain what I mean by that really quickly before I go further about the political part. Kamala, prior to Joe Biden dropping out of the race, and I think it was Freebird on the All In podcast who kind of first made me think about this, and then I did some research. But he basically said that there were 5 different cadres of voters: pro-Trump, pro-Biden, Republican, Democrat, and none of the above. Like the least, or like one in the middle was like none of the above. Fucking horrible, both of those guys. And the Republican Democrat was like more of like, I guess I'll plug my nose and vote for the party more than the person, right? And what he astutely found or said, and I think it was a really smart, and then as I've done some research, I actually think it's true. The reason we've seen such a bump in Kamala is that middle group that was like, oh God, anybody but Biden or Trump, anybody other than them, they were then freed to go to Kamala because it provided a change from those two dummies. You know what I mean? And I don't mean dummies as in like they're stupid. I just mean like dummies as in like this is insane that we're still stuck in this, right? So that moment, the moment, and it's as indicated by Colbert, people are looking for a change. They were specifically looking for a change from either Trump or Biden. She filled that. However, to go back to the political answer, she struggles to answer how she is a change candidate from Biden. And hey, that's cool. I respect loyalty and shit, but I don't think you have to be loyal by being false. Like you can be loyal by saying, yeah, listen, it wasn't my administration. I'm a member of the administration, but the president sets the tone of the administration. I'm going to be different in many ways because I get to push forward priorities that I believe in. And then she can talk about the priorities that she believes in, which you may or may not agree with, but she has some talking points on. She could say, I'm, the $50,000 for startups. My priority is to unleash the ambition of the American people to make it more feasible for them to create the businesses of their dreams, right? That's one example that she could say. But she struggles. And what did she say? She said, well, I'm obviously not Joe Biden. No shit. And I think it's important to say with 27 days left, I'm also not Donald Trump. Basically what she's saying is she knows, and they've seen the same polling, I'm sure, that I just said, there are enough people in the middle that wanted neither Trump nor Biden that she can get just by being neither one of them. And that may be astute, but there is a level of she is a bad politician because when she gives political answers, you feel like she's only giving that answer for a political outcome. Does she really believe that? Will she really do that? Because we all know we're going to get screwed in some way by the politician. There's an old joke about the politician that goes to hell and goes to heaven, he dies or whatever. And before he can go to heaven, St. Peter says, hey, we have a new policy. We give everybody a tour of both heaven and hell, and then we let the person decide rather than saying, hey, you go here, you go there. So he gives I think it's a senator, he gives the senator a tour of heaven, and everybody's just kind of like walking around, flying around, and seems kind of boring. And then he goes to hell and he gets the tour and he's got sees all of his old buddies from the Senate and some people he knows from the House, maybe a couple presidents, smoking cigars, playing golf, lots of pretty girls around. Tour's over and St. Peter's like, all right, well, what are you going to choose? And Senator's like, I never thought I'd say this. I'm gonna take hell. I think hell's those are my people. It's like, all right, cool. Sends him to hell, gets back down there, and now all of his friends are burning, screaming in pain. The pretty girls are gone. The cigarettes are being put out. It's a little graphic, but anyway, you get the point. It's worse. And he says to he says to Satan, he's like, Satan, what happened? Yesterday, we were all playing golf. We were drinking whiskey. We were smoking cigars. There were pretty girls walking around. And Satan says, well, yesterday we were campaigning. Today you voted for us. Point being, we all know we're going to catch the short end of the stick. But we don't like it to be so obvious. We want to believe that when politicians give a political answer, there is some deep value in there, because that increases the likelihood that what you're saying to us isn't an empty campaign promise. It's actually based on you wanting to do as much as you can in that area. And this is where Trump wins, because even, Charlemagne the God has a very good quote. He says, Republicans are more believable in their lies than Democrats are in their truths. And I think that's a brilliant quote. And I think I probably didn't do it justice. I think it's much better when he says it. Maybe he says it differently, but you get the point. And I don't know it's true, by the way. I'm not saying Republicans are liars and Democrats are truth tellers. I'm not making that statement, but it does say something about the two candidates very specifically in this race. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump is always a liar, but he is a politician. So you could just change it to say Donald Trump is more believable in his political answers than Kamala is in hers. They're both giving political answers. It wasn't just on the Tonight Show or the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Kamala also fucked this up on The View. I mean, this is her, like, in startup world, we would say these are her ideal customer profile, right? Like, everybody in there on The View, in the audience, is a Kamala voter. And it couldn't have been a more friendly crowd. It would be like Trump going and doing like a Fox town hall or something. I mean, like it's like when he's on the 5, if you know what I mean. It's like it's the exact same thing. And she blew it again, man. Like, how are you going to be different? And she's like fumbling around, and then she comes back later. She's like, I'm going to have a Republican in my cabinet. That's one way I'll be different. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Isn't the Postmaster General DeJoy was appointed by Trump, is a Republican? So that's not even a fucking difference, Kamala. I don't know. You could. It either shows to me an arrogance and a certainty of winning, where you don't have to think that is a question that you need to nail, but you're being asked it many times by different people. How are you not prepared for this? This is like the one answer I actually think you should be incredibly prepared for. You should know exactly how you are going to be different. And it should be in all the ways that people don't like the fucking Biden administration. How am I going to be different? Well, in the Biden administration, and you don't even have to say it's going to be different as if the Biden administration was wrong. You could say it's going to be different as a continuation and improvement of what we laid the groundwork. We fixed the problems of the Trump administration. Now we can be more aggressive in improving people's lives for the future. We had to fix the fucking past, and now we're going to build for the future. That's a huge difference, by the way. We're going to build on the victories that we had, and we're going to do the work that is still left to be done. Okay, great. Now, what is that, right? And I will stop here and say it's quite unfair in a way. Many people have talked about this, and I brought this up multiple times with Chris, so it's a bit redundant, but stick with me. It is a different threshold of expectation for Kamala than Trump. Trump gives answers that don't even make any fucking sense to questions. There was one about, like, what are you going to do about childcare at the Economic Council that Trump was at? And he was like, yeah, Ivanka and Marco Rubio, they looked into this. They did a really great job. But it was like, he didn't even answer the question. But she doesn't answer the question either. But people hear it differently because he's such a good politician. They hear conviction, and he says it with conviction. So people think, oh, he has a strong held conviction. So much so that I like to point out that in recent polling on the Hill as of today, there was a poll. Gallup found that 60% of respondents say Harris is likable, compared to 38% who said the same about Trump. Okay, so 60% versus 38%. Now, however, Trump ranked much higher in terms of leadership qualities. Approximately 60% of respondents said Trump is a strong and decisive leader, compared to 48% who said the same about Harris. They say 61% of respondents said the former president can get things done, compared to 49% who say the Democratic nominee can. Now, this is not, by the way, you may think you understand my voting habits or who I'm for, who I'm against, but I can only point out what I see as the facts, and maybe those are colored by my beliefs. But I will tell you this: how do we define leadership qualities? And I think human wise, we don't actually define leadership qualities by leadership. We define leadership qualities by the feeling of somebody having leadership qualities, especially our culture in America. This isn't true in other places of the world, but especially the more loud you are, the more bravado you have, the more certainty when you speak and sounding like you have conviction. You can be as fucking wrong as daylight is dark. You could be a horrible leader, but when you speak, you say it with so much gusto that other people believe you. That is what we call leadership in this country. And everyone says, by the way, many people who support Trump hate George W. Bush. Oh, he lied about the Iraq war. He lied about all these things. He lied. Yeah, but he said it with so much fucking conviction, everybody went along with it. He was a shit leader. I will be the first to tell you, I think he was a horrible president. I think he bled this country dry. I think he destroyed what the opportunities that America had in the future. If there's one, I think he may end up being one of the most consequential presidents for the United States in the most negative possible way. Him and Cheney, by the way, which is another thing about Kamala Harris. Don't get me started on Dick Cheney, who's, by the way, if Liz Cheney ends up in her cabinet, I will go back to exactly what I said before. Kamala Harris will be primaried and she will lose to maybe Josh Shapiro, maybe Andy Bashir in Kentucky. There are a couple of backbench, strong, kind of moderate Democrats. So much so, by the way, anyway, I think there would be a merging of like the blue dog Democrats and the progressive AOCs, the squad, to oust Kamala. The one thing that Kamala said, the big difference between me is I will have a Republican in my cabinet. You better watch what you do, Kamala, because I actually think you could be laying the groundwork for getting completely sideswiped in 2028 if you do win. So you'll get to be the first female president. You'll get to be the first president of South Asian descent. You'll be the first Black female president. All of those things, great. You earned your place in the history books. But if you put Liz Cheney in your cabinet, I think you will create a maelstrom, a shitstorm in the Democratic Party, and you will not be able to govern, and you will not be reelected. I'm just going to tell you right now. No Cheney should be allowed anywhere near the executive branch ever again after Dick Cheney. So my point being, though, we all went along. Everyone went along with what was being fed to us. Not because it was good leadership, not because they were right, but because they were saying it with such conviction and determination and wouldn't take no for an answer. And we're like, oh yeah, they seem like, yeah, George Bush is a decisive leader. No, he's not. He's not a decisive leader. He just fucking bullshits with such conviction. He's a good bluffer, maybe. I wouldn't want to play poker against him, but that we confuse those things. So maybe it is true that he's more decisive than Kamala. I don't know. I think she's actually shown quite a bit of decisiveness. I don't know if in the right way, but in her support of Israel, she made a decision. She's leaned into it. She keeps leaning into it, saying that Iran is a threat to the primary threat to the United States. It's not, by the way. It's a fucking country in the middle of kind of like central Middle East Asia, right? It's not the greatest existential threat to the United States. The greatest existential threat to the United States is the United States. Whatever. As far as other countries go, it's probably not in the top 3. And North Carolina's a big, I mean, North Korea is a bigger threat to the United States. North Korea is a bigger threat to the existential survival of the globe. They have nuclear weapons. You know what I mean? Like, no. So it was a fucking stupid statement. But she showed decisiveness. Again, does that make her a good leader? No, because I think she's highly wrong. And I don't have to agree with you for you to be a good leader, but you do have to show your work. Do you know what I mean? Like, work that problem out for me. Show me how you got there. And then I might believe that you're a leader. So I was shocked when I saw this, especially 61% of respondents say former President Trump can get things done compared to 49% who say the Democratic nominee can. Now, this is the same thing about the difference between a Harris campaign and a Trump and a Biden, a Harris administration and a Biden administration. I don't think we actually know if she can get anything done. I don't know that you could respond to that. I mean, my response would probably be like, I have no idea. If the question was who has gotten more things done, was it the Trump administration or the Biden administration? Without a doubt, the Biden administration has done more than the Trump administration did. The 4 years of the Biden administration are way more productive than the 4 years of the Trump administration. Now, it is really only fair to look at the 2 years pre-COVID, 3 years pre-COVID, and the 3 year and then a 3-year period of the Biden administration. Like, that's the only fair thing, because the Trump administration was incredibly focused, maybe solely focused, really, on the COVID pandemic, the response. So it's not fair to do, a 3-year to a 4-year, right? Although Biden had to deal with COVID for the first 2 years as well. So I think it's a wash, actually. You could look at the whole 4-year period for both. But the Inflation Reduction Act, infrastructure, pulling out of Afghanistan, regardless of whether you believe if it was executed well, just the actual doing of it, way more was done under Biden. Some of it was done under Trump. He certainly negotiated with the Taliban by cutting the Afghani partners out. That's an important thing that people don't talk about, but unilateral negotiation with just the Taliban, allowing something like 10,000 prisoners to be released, which I think one of which is now the current head of the Taliban. So, point being, on its face, I just think that this is flawed in how we are looking at it. But it is a reflection of her not being a good politician. She's had some moments where I'm like, oh, damn, she's picking up. She had a great debate performance. I thought she had a great speech at the convention. Other than that, not so strong. I urge you all to look at her 60 Minutes interview. Now, that's in the time that we have left, there's not a ton of time, right? We're gonna get really focused on some things here. I think it's interesting. I want to hit a couple of really important aspects of this election in general. So here in Texas, the Secretary of State, Jay Nelson, told elections workers that they must accept non-citizen driver licenses as voter ID, but said and reminded them that it's against the law to knowingly allow a non-citizen to vote. I'm going to repeat that for you because you're probably just like me, like, what the fuck does that mean? In Texas, the Secretary of State has told elections workers that they must accept non-citizen driver licenses as voter ID for ballots during the election. But it is against the law to knowingly allow a non-citizen to vote. Now, if I show you a driver's license that says my name and it says non-citizen driver's license, just rationally, right? A reasonable person, this is like a legal term, right? It is reasonable for me to assume that I'm a non-citizen because I have a non-citizen driver's license. It is then also reasonable for me not to give them a ballot because it is illegal for me to allow a non-citizen to vote. So this conflicting directive from Jane Nelson is another example of how fucking stupid politicians can be. Everywhere. In a conservative state like Texas or in the bluest of blue states, right? Makes no sense. I wanted to point that out to you. For everyone, you've heard us talk here before about non-citizen voting. Is it really an issue? Is it not? The statistics say that it's not. I think Chris provided some examples of some research that was done. I think it was in Michigan. It might have been Wisconsin or Minnesota. Actually, I think it was Minnesota, to be honest with you, that non-citizens said, oh, yeah, I voted. But point being, that for sure directive is just confusing and stupid on its face. Also, something kind of affects, we talked about the border earlier. I don't think this is getting enough attention. And I think this is also feeding into kind of some of that more conspiratorial minded people. Muckraker News reported that, and I think this is kind of well known at this point, but that the federal government has been giving unaccompanied minors from the border to individuals that are unknown to them. And several whistleblowers, and now it's kind of being looked into by the Congress, that many of these kids are being trafficked, human trafficked. So this is a real problem. And I don't think that, it's the border is kind of become politicized as if the right or Republicans are, they don't have any empathy for people coming here. Also on the left, it's being demonized. People on the left or Democrats are being demonized as like having no empathy for stopping people from entering illegally. Now, either one of those may be true, false, I don't know. But I will say that I think the demonization aspect of it is unnecessary. The reality is that by having a broken system, there are knock-on effects that affect everyone, whether it's people looking for a job in the United States, Americans, whether it's kids that can't go to their school in cities around the United States because migrants are living in those schools, or whether or not it's children that have somehow found their way here, whether it's from parents back in their home country that gave them money and said, go make a better life for yourself, get a hold of so-and-so when you get there, or whatever the case might be. Those kids, it's too easy for them to find themselves into, it's a risk. And that shows kind of the struggle of their lives, that their families are willing to take that risk with them and for them for the potential chance of having a better life, right? So the point being is that, yes, it is an issue that needs to be solved. And as a border state, Kamala has said she's the only person running for president that has been the primary law enforcement officer of a border state, that she prosecuted transnational crime. All of that is true. So this, to call back to something earlier, this is an area where she could clearly differentiate herself from Joe Biden. She could say, with recent reporting and seeing that kids are being human trafficked because our border, we haven't, and she could lay some of it at the feet of Republicans. On day one, I'm going to bring back the border bill. I'm going to work with Republicans to pass a strong border bill that ensures the dignity and humanity of people who are coming here and fleeing certain situations and seeking asylum, while also enforcing the integrity of our borders and forcing the rule of law. Like, I think she could differentiate herself and say, that's how I'm different. And she could say, we started that, we've been working on it, but I'm going to take it farther, right? I am going to push farther. A missed opportunity, I think. Sometimes I wish Chris was here because he'd probably be like, Justin, that's fucking stupid. Politically, you would never get elected. All right. Let's talk about voter fraud really quickly. I told you that Alyssa Slotkin and Mike Rogers had a debate. I'll leave it up to you to watch and decide for yourself who won. And she certainly kind of owned the part about abortion. I thought she crushed that. I think that helps her. She's she's doing quite well in the polling. I think she's up by 6 points, maybe something like that. It recently came out from the Detroit Free Press, I think it was, but a Detroit publication, that Mike Rogers, who, for anyone who doesn't know, prior to the current sitting senator from Michigan deciding to retire, Mike Rogers bought an estate in Florida and had been living there for 6 months. It was only after this Senate seat came available that Mike Rogers decided that he wanted to be a Michigander again, maybe solely for this Senate seat. I don't know. So he bought a property, demolished it, and claims that as his residence, which he also used, my understanding, to vote for himself in the primaries this year. However, that house does not have a certificate of occupancy, nor could anybody live there if they want. Go online if you want, type in Mike Rogers, demolished house at home. Nobody could live there because there is no house there. That is, my understanding, a likely voter fraud case, because when you claim your address, you claim your residency, that is where you have to live. Now, there is some situation as to whether or not he is living with his brother. The newspaper in Detroit, I guess they staked out the brother's house. They questioned neighbors. They said they've never seen Mike Rogers. So we're all worried about, as we worry about illegal immigrants voting with a non-citizen driver's license, which is a rational thing to worry about. No person with a non-citizen driver's license should be allowed to fucking vote. It doesn't make any sense. Jane Nelson. But also a really rich fucking guy who wanted to retire and has like a multi-million-dollar estate in Florida, is a resident of Florida for all intents and purposes, shouldn't be able to buy a Senate seat in Michigan either. And if you vote for yourself in Michigan and you don't live in Michigan, you don't live where you say you live, you're not a resident of Michigan, that is voter fraud. Both of them are voter fraud. Let's treat them equally. Because ultimately, by the way, if Mike Rogers is not residing in Michigan, he is a non-citizen of Michigan. So they're both non-citizens for the election that they're voting in. It's got to be the same. Listen, it's really interesting this week. You may not have seen it, but the Wisconsin Senate race for, I think it's Baldwin's seat, the Cook Political Report has moved that from leaning Democrat to a Democrat toss-up, which means it's narrowing. Now, she's running against Eric Hovda. You may not know Eric Hovda, right? And you may just like him because he's a Republican and you're a Republican. That's your right. You may hate him because you're a Democrat and he's a Republican. You hate him because he's a Republican. That's your right. Preferably, we get to know policies and background of people, and we don't like them or don't vote for them because of specific things that we can look at. Well, one specific thing that we can look at, and I'm gonna fuck up the name of the bank, but Eric Hovda's bank flew like $24 million from Banco Mexico or some bank. It wasn't Banco Mercado, a bank in Mexico, flew the money from Mexico to the United States. Now, the issue with that bank in Mexico is that it was supposedly it was suspected of being a cartel bank. So why is a bank that's why would Eric Hovda's bank fly money into the U.S. from this bank when the banks are informed by FinCEN, the Financial Criminal Division or whatever, and they know troubled banks. They know, first of all, banks don't give a shit. How many banks, and we can do a whole episode of just the number of banks that have had to plead. I don't even know if they plead guilty, but maybe they get away with not pleading anything. They just pay a fine. But for money laundering of international criminals. But just so you know, if you care about the rule of law for illegal immigrants coming across the border at the southern border, if you care about that, I would think you would also care about a rich asshole who works at a bank or owns a bank or is executive of a fucking bank flying the illicit funds from that same country into the United States. Just make it make sense. You don't have to be on a team. And you can be on a team, but you got to call your own teammates out, right? Be willing to stand up and be like, I'm not voting. I'm a Republican, but I'm not going to vote for this guy or that guy who's also Republican, but they don't deserve, they shouldn't be in a position of power. However, it's narrowing. And maybe you could say, yeah, he's bad, but he's not as bad as the other side. But then tell me what the other side has done so poorly, right? What is so bad about Tammy Baldwin? Tell me what she's done that you don't like. What policies she's voted for, what things that made your life worse where she shouldn't continue to be a senator and this other guy should, who has these kind of like sketchy past, right? Also, I gotta tell you, I'm starting to be enamored with some people. Has anybody heard of this guy, Ryan Walters, the Oklahoma school board guy? I mean, I couldn't make this up. I would have never thought 10 years ago to think something like this was even going to happen, could happen. He wants to buy 50,000 Trump Bibles for the schools of Oklahoma. Ironically, if you read a bit about this, I think he was able to kind of pass this policy of all of the schools of Oklahoma that they would have Bibles in the schools, but there was also a list of requirements of what had to be in the Bible. And wouldn't you know that the only Bible that qualified based on those requirements is the Trump Bible. It's not actually like it's not the Bible according to Trump. It's the Trump Bible that he's endorsed from the guy that sang "I'm proud to be an American." You know what I'm talking about. What is his name? Anyway, so by the way, earlier J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon that was the name I was looking for. Maybe that means now that I've cleared that one out, this other guy from the Trump Bible will come through. Anyway, Trump gets a cut off every Bible sold as kind of like a spokesperson. It's not even his product. He's just shilling the product, lends his name to it. It's called the Trump Bible. Ironically, if you Google it, you'll see that just recently there's a story that came out that the Trump Bibles that are pro-America and all of these things are made in China. Because what's more American than making an American Trump Bible, rah, 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 the chosen country of God's will? We have our shit made in China. So anyway, this guy, Ryan Walters, I probably to this very moment, I think today he is going before a grand jury to explain the spending of the budget, why he's buying 50,000 Trump Bibles, and has yet to spend the $250,000 that was expressly set aside for emergency inhalers at schools. I mean, life-saving for kids who have asthma. Anything can happen, especially if you know kids. The kids can come to school and, I forgot my inhaler, or it broke, or I dropped it, or I don't know where it is, but I'm having a fucking asthma attack. Schools, they allotted $250,000 for schools to have emergency inhalers. He's yet to acquire those inhalers, yet to spend that money. It's set aside for it. It's an easy buy. But his focus right now is buying those 50,000 Trump Bibles. I thought you should know about that guy. I also think you should know about Gabe Evans, who also had a debate this past week for Colorado's 8th district seat. And he wouldn't answer why he supported hitting kids in school. Now, that's kind of a clickbaity statement, and I'm not really a clickbaity person. It's very complicated. I'm not even going to pretend like I know all of the intricacies and nuances of his argument. I do know in watching the debate, he didn't say, and the moderator gave up on him answering the question. He didn't say when, how, why it's appropriate to hit kids. Now, he did try to say something about safety, and the moderator stopped him and said, no. There was already a carve out. There's already expressly a carve out that if it takes physical interaction to save someone, so for safety of other students or safety of that student, you can use physical force to make the situation safe. And he said, you can't use that because that was already there. You supported more. Explain what you mean. And the guy just wouldn't explain. So the only thing to infer from that, for me, is he thinks it's okay to hit kids at school. I don't know why. He didn't say. You may agree with him. It'd be an interesting thing to hear why you would agree with him. But that's where we find ourselves. It has been an interesting week in House and Senate debates across the country and states across the country. We have a couple of contests up right now. We have a contest for the Texas Senate debate between Cruz and Allred. Allred is also gaining traction. I hesitate to use the word surging because I wouldn't say it quite like that. But he is in a very good place as well, which explains why the Cook Political Report, I think it's the Cook Report, actually has the Senate staying in Democrat hands, whereas the House, it's a toss-up. If you go to Cook Political Report and you click on ratings, you will see there are many. There's probably 2 or 3 dozen House seats that are toss-up, leaning one way or the other. In fact, there are 14 toss-ups that are, Republican toss-up, meaning slight advantage to the Republican, and 12 toss-ups that are Democrat toss-ups, which means slightly leaning in the Democrats' favor. Personally, in looking at the Republican toss-up, I don't know that I agree that Duarte in California's 13th, nor Valadeo in California's 22nd are Republican toss-up. I would say that it's maybe in the Democrats' favor a bit. Also, Molinaro in New York's 19th. I think that's that. And also D'Esposito, we talked about him in New York's 4th. And Chavez de Reamer in Oregon's 5th. I think that in looking at it, those are some of the most likely to go. I would favor the Democrats slightly there. But that's the way they currently have it, that the House could go one way or the other right now. So we may end up with a situation there. It's toss-ups all the way around in the House, the Senate, and the White House. We could end up with a trifecta government. We could end up with people splitting their tickets. It remains to be seen. All right. I will leave it there. That was a lot of just me talking, getting on my soapbox for a couple of things. We are getting down to Election Day. We are full bore contests. We have people playing and winning prize pots. And I welcome all of you to join us. And please, if you like the episode, feel free to share it with someone. Love to get your feedback. I always say it, but your comments are amazing. And if you're at all interested in coming on and telling Chris and Justin why we are fucking morons and don't know anything, I would love to have you come on and tell us why. And I don't know that Chris and I are always in agreement. So maybe you come on and you're like, Chris, what is up with this guy, Justin? He's an idiot. Or maybe you come on and you agree with me, in which case, I don't know. I would be worried because Chris knows a lot. And I have a bit more faith in what he says than what I say. But either way, if anyone is interested, drop us a comment. Tell us what you'd like to talk about, what you'd want to come on the show and say. And we'd love to start having some people come on and tell us. And if you've entered at one of our contests and you want to come on and tell us why you did or didn't win or why you should have won or whatever, I'd love to have that as well. So, all right, until next week when I think Chris will be back, everybody in Florida stay safe with Milton, and hopefully also there's going to be plenty of precipitation, I'm sure. I hope it doesn't make matters worse in other parts of the Southeast. And our thoughts go out to you, and we'll see you soon. All right.
As the trench warfare set, we break it down. No sweat, no net. Balance and touchdowns, where's your bet? Candidate playbooks, lines we set. Irreverent and free, we call it out. Competition fierce, ain't no doubt. Policy blitz and a Hail Mary pass. Legislation touchdowns, who's top class? Elections heated, brackets tight. Political fantasy, bring the night. Cynical plays and cynical ploys. Draft your politicians, trade your boys. Tackle the issues, fumble through lies. Only the sharp survive in our eyes. Campaign trails and field goals fade. Winners and losers all display. Independent spirit, competition fun. Balance and touchdowns, our game.